Reminding me of the class last year. It's like, that's from remember that yeah, I could definitely like. Yeah. Like you put me on something. He was like, and that's awesome. Thank you, that's like.
That's like several.
Yeah.
Flags.
I want
And then I hope someone's.
No. It's like, sorry about that. I don't think so. Love to hear customer days. I don't think company. Legally allowed to drive. And then part of that I'm in HJS 101 and I'm a June place too.
The whole game.
I mean, I like the church, so it's like I kind of know those. So it's you're like,
Hello. Hi. Do you mind signing in?
It's like that. It's like.
This is a genuine question, but do you still call it goals? When you learn about it?
Yeah, I mean, you feel bad that
Really? Been teaching it?
or no, once when you talk about like it or in the title versus the finish line.
Hi.
Like the two is probably
But it's not.
yeah, but he's saying like in the inside. So don't vote me, literally don't vote.
No, who's teaching it? Yeah.
Yeah, literally. You know why? That are just, yeah, I know. Yeah. We watched it.
I appreciate that.
I get it.
Hurry, you gotta learn about this.
Is anyone sitting?
No.
Hi.
And like, the guys, yeah.
לא, גם ג'ן וגם קריסטיאן ביקשו את זה.
Yeah.
לא הוגן Oh my gosh, זה רעיון טוב.
Yeah.
צריכה עזרה?
When I worked at Starbucks, there was a couple of these, so you never knew who was. It was the boyfriend.
שלנו, אני לא רואה אותם.
יש לך 5 דקות. יסתדר, אם לא את יכולה לדבר קצת. ואז נשחרר אותך.
It's referring. Oh, there's Adele Berlin.
יפה.
Thank you.
I don't plan on. I mean, I did really go to see God broke up. So I was like, I'm making it. Yeah. My mom said, like, I don't put my mom in bird. They were sweet, so I don't think they're that much. So it's interesting to see my whole like mom's it's like, yeah. It's such a difference from my mother. Yeah. That's like signs like kind of learned both sides that way. I like signs of everybody's. So I enjoy it. All of you. Yeah, but I like God was like one year. They don't really care. I was getting out there. I was kind of they care if you like you pass it. I'm just surrounded by Jewish culture.
I was just talking about this with my Catholic friend. I had no idea that there were different. No, because that person, those people that are out there like reading the entire Bible, they're reading the Protestant one. I was like, wait, which one are they reading? And yeah, they're reading the Protestant one.
I was like writing up my tables.
Hi, Adele, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Not a usual format for me, but we have a room. Thank you. We have a room full of students, and we also have a lot of people on Zoom. So, you'll let me know when you want me to share the handout. Okay.
Okay, I'll let you know.
It's great to have you. It's great to see you. Not what I wanted to do. Where did my Zoom?
Let me see if I can fix my lighting a little bit better. I don't know if it makes a difference.
How do I close the participant list without shutting down the whole Zoom? Will this X close the participant list or the whole thing?
Don't close it.
Try the arrow, the little arrow at the top.
Yeah, I just want to get rid of this.
Got a participation right here? Look at this. Can't close.
Okay, thanks.
I have like.
I would not. That guy's in the car on the right hand, but there's sorry. I found this little like that has literally everything, like staples, staple remover, tape, scissors. It was a Target. Cover your face. I know. It's been really convenient recently. I didn't just buy them. When I go out, I like remember everything was like the thing. Oh, it's store night or so I'm using obviously like I didn't go there. years until I was living alone, and I was like, I don't want to live with you. So I feel like it's something you're not consciously aware of, and you're like, wait, I know that.
Hello.
Why don't you
If you would sign it in.
You're going to think that you need to do one thing else. Then you just.
Me doing my thing. I was doing it every
I cried after.
I know.
I'm just doing that for sure.
I have a lot.
I usually do like.
Yeah.
I just wanna do.
It's just because I'm supposed to do other classes and they cancel this one. And I
So we're just gonna wait another couple of minutes. People are still trickling in.
That's bio needs to lay outside.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I was like, I don't know what you said.
I already fulfilled all my language requirements, I understand it.
My high school transcripts to be transcribed. And then I was like, saying, you need to.
Yeah.
If I see one.
Yeah, that's what I'm done majoring in business management inside because I'm in the business, so I don't have to do it. Yeah. Which is so nice. I know.
Cause like.
And then what's the point that everyone else has to do that? I'm like getting this.
But also like.
If you're in business. Yeah. That doesn't mean you're gonna encounter someone.
Yeah. High school credits don't
They do, I just still need that.
Yeah, mine didn't.
Much of your experience provides a lot of stuff for your careers.
It's my first year after the.
I don't know, I'm doing a dual degree in my life, so it's double major, even though when I got here, I like specifically did it. And also, he's not reading that out of minor.
Yeah, I just that came in with so many credits that like I still got to graduate early. If I thought.
I was already before. If I get there, I get there.
Yeah.
I just have a major.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's like I'm at a science, technology major. So it's like, I study with.
All right. Can everyone hear me? Can everyone hear me? All right. Adele, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Is this loud enough for you to hear Adele? Yeah? Okay. It is a great pleasure for me to kick off our Jewish Studies lecture series this semester with a room full of students. Thank you all for coming. And with a huge Zoom audience. We currently have 34 people in the Zoom audience, which is really quite exciting. And it's especially pleasurable for me to welcome our guest, Dr. Adele Berlin, who I don't know whether to start with her formal introduction or with my own personal introduction to you, but I will actually start with your formal introduction and then I'll add my own personal note. So Adele Berlin is Professor Emerita of Biblical Studies at the University of Maryland. Her interests lie primarily in the literary nature of the Hebrew Bible and in biblical interpretation through the ages. An interpreter herself, Professor Berlin has written commentaries on the books of Zephaniah, Lamentations, Esther, and Psalms 120 to 150. She co-edited with Mark Brettler the Jewish Study Bible, now in its second edition. I was going to bring my first edition Jewish Study Bible, but I had to walk across campus with my computer and a bunch of brochures, so I was a little bit overwhelmed. But it's used, I know, in Martin's class, right? And in my class, we use the Jewish Study Bible. And she co-edited with Jeffrey Tigay the Posen Library of Jewish Culture and Civilization, Volume 1, Ancient Israel from its beginnings through 332 BCE. She is now at work on a commentary on Song of Songs. That's a tough one. I can't wait to read it. On a personal note, it is my greatest honor to host Dr. Berlin this evening. First of all, because she is the consummate teacher, and I am thrilled to share you, Dr. Berlin, with my community of students, colleagues, and friends at the University of Kentucky. But also, I'm excited to have you because you were on the search committee that hired me at the University of Maryland, and you ushered me into my career, a career that I love, and for that, I am immensely grateful. So without further ado, I turn the floor and the Zoom over to Adele Berlin, who will speak on the Jewish Study Bible, what makes it Jewish? And you'll let me know when you want me to share the screen with our Zoom people.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let me say that we have never forgiven you for leaving Maryland, but the people in Kentucky are the benefactors. When Professor Jelen approached me about this program, she said that she wanted to put together a lecture series on reading the Bible from a Jewish perspective. So I thought immediately of the Jewish Study Bible because it was designed to do precisely that. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. This is a little self-serving because, as you heard, I'm a co-editor of this volume along with Mark Brettler. But I assure you, I'm not here to sell books. I'm here to talk about a Jewish perspective on reading the Bible. The Jewish Study Bible is published by Oxford University Press. Oxford University Press is an academic press that publishes, among many types of academic books, Bibles and academic books about the Bible. And among these are a number of study Bibles. The study Bible is the Bible in English translation, accompanied by introductions for each book of the Bible and brief annotations on the text. The study Bibles have gone through multiple editions, and they're intended for wide use: students, teachers, clergy, general readers, whoever wants to read them. They're used in secular universities, seminaries, study groups, and individual readers. When you think of Oxford Study Bibles, the primary one is called the New Oxford Annotated Bible. It's currently in its 5th edition, and they're working on a 6th edition. This one is based on the New Revised Standard Version. That's a mainstream Protestant translation, although actually the people on the committee, the translators, were a wide group of people, including Jews and Christians of various denominations. The New Revised Standard Version has now been updated under the name New Revised Standard Version Updated Edition. So you see, translations keep going on forever. Notice, however, that this Oxford volume is not called the Protestant Study Bible. It tends to be, I would say, the most religiously neutral of the study Bibles. Both Jewish and Christian scholars contributed the annotations. But once in a while, especially compared to the Jewish Study Bible, it has a Christian ambience because its main readership is Christian. In addition to the Jewish Study Bible and the New Oxford Annotated Bible, Oxford also publishes the Catholic Study Bible. You may already suspect that while on one hand, Protestants, Catholics, and Jews all have a Bible, they may not all have the same Bible or the same way of reading the Bible. Yes, Jews and Christians have to some extent different Bibles and different ways of reading them, and I think we should honor those differences while we try to understand them. So, what makes the Jewish Study Bible Jewish? First of all, and here, Sheila, I need the handouts of the books of the Bible, but before you look at them, let me pose a question, and you can shout out an answer if you're not all muted. How many books are there in the Bible?
How many books?
66.
66?
66. That's a good answer. Anybody want to try a different number?
Anyone else?
73.
73?
24.
24?
It depends on the
24
Bible.
is a good answer.
How about
73?
73?
73. I'm going to pass on that for a moment. Anybody else? That actually is pretty good. Okay. So there are several correct answers: 24, 39, 46, 66. When you say 66, that includes the New Testament. Jewish Bibles do not include the New Testament. They include what's called in Christian circles the Old Testament, and what's called in Jewish circles the Hebrew Bible or the Tanakh. So how do we get those different numbers? And is it really a different Bible? Now we need our handouts for the books of the Bible.
Are you seeing it, Adele? I have it up on the
I'm
screen.
seeing it, but I can't move it.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay. So it's hard to look at all of these at once. What I gave you here is the Protestant Old Testament, the Catholic, that is the Roman Catholic, and the Jewish. The Eastern Orthodox is slightly different, but I didn't want to get too complicated here. Okay, everybody's Bible starts with the same 5 books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. That is the Torah, or the Pentateuch, or the 5 books of Moses. Then you get a difference in the order of the books and the way they are counted. If you're looking at let's look at the Protestant. What you have next is a group of books that are historical books, they're narrative books. And you see Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, Ezra, and Nehemiah, and Esther. Let's stop there. Then what you get are books that are wisdom and poetry: Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, or Song of Solomon. And then you get the prophets. And I want to point out to you that Daniel is among the prophets here. And if you count all of those books as listed, you'll come up with 39. That's the Protestant Old Testament. I've taken away the New Testament because we're really talking about the Jewish Bible. If you go down to the Catholic list, you will see that there are a couple of more, and I underlined them. Can you go down to the Catholic list?
This is it.
Oh, yes. Okay. Oh, they're not underlined here.
No.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. So after Nehemiah is Tobit, Judith, then comes Esther, then comes First Maccabees and Second Maccabees. And then you have something called the Wisdom of Solomon. Not after the Song of Solomon is the Wisdom of Solomon and Sirach. These are books from the Apocrypha. They are included in Catholic Bibles, but not in Protestant Bibles. So if you have 39 books in Protestant Bibles, you have 46 books, that is 39 plus these from the Apocrypha that I just mentioned. But they're in the same order, except the apocryphal books are inserted. Now let's go to the Jewish Bible. It's really the same as the Protestant Old Testament, but it doesn't look that way in the order. It starts with Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and then it continues with some of the historical books, but not all of them. Joshua, Judges, and 1 and 2 Samuel counts as one book. So we're going to reduce the number from 39 to 24 here. And the Hebrew Bible is the Torah, which is the first 5. Then it's the prophets, and the prophets include the former prophets, which are the books of Samuel and Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, and the latter prophets, which include Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the 12 minor prophets all count as one book. They were probably originally written on one scroll. Let me mention that the reason that the order is so flexible is that originally these weren't written in bound books. Each book was written on an individual scroll. So you could, more or less place the scroll however you wanted. After the prophets, and by the way, Daniel is not among the prophets in Jewish Bibles. Daniel is in the 3rd section called the Writings, which is kind of a hodgepodge of poetry, wisdom, which is also in poetry, and some prose books. Psalms, Proverbs, Job, Song of Songs, Ruth, Lamentations, Ecclesiastes, Esther, Daniel. Ezra and Nehemiah count as one, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles count as one. And if you count all of those, that's 24. So it's the same Bible, but it's a slightly different Bible. It's in a different order, and the books are counted slightly differently. Okay, let's go on.
Adele, do you want me to close this screen or?
Yeah, you can. I don't think we need it anymore, unless people want it. Okay, so the Jewish Study Bible is arranged in the listing in the order that I just showed you for Jewish Bibles. Second of all, the Jewish Study Bible is based on a Jewish translation. It's not based on the New Revised Standard Version. It's based on the New Jewish Publication Society translation. There was a previous older Jewish Publication Society translation, and this was revised beginning in 1985 and thereafter. There is actually no official English translation in the Jewish community, but the New Jewish Publication Society is probably the most widely used, at least except for in Orthodox circles, where they tend to use the Art Scroll or now the New Koren translation. The New Jewish Publication Society, like modern Christian translations, it's based on the latest linguistic knowledge, historical knowledge, archaeology, etc. But there are some subtle differences that distinguish a Jewish translation from a Christian translation. One little known one is the way the new JPS translates the Hebrew word Yeshua. It uses the word deliverance. It never uses the word salvation. For example, in Exodus 15:2, the new JPS says, "The Lord is my strength and might. He is become my deliverance." The New Revised Standard Version, updated edition, says, "The Lord is my strength and my might, and he has become my salvation." The new JPS avoid salvation because that is such a loaded term in Christian theology, and it wanted a more neutral word. The third point I want to make is that the new JPS translation takes seriously the Hebrew of the Masoretic text. It is more likely to prefer the Masoretic text to other versions to the extent that's feasible. So what's the Masoretic text? The Masoretic text is the Hebrew text of the Bible, preserved in manuscripts that date from around the year 1000 of the Common Era. That's like more than 1,000 years after the Bible was first written. By that time, the books of the Bible have been copied over and over, a zillion times, I'll say. They were all hand copies. In fact, the Masoretic texts themselves were written before there was printing. These are all hand copies. And inevitably, when things are copied by hand, variants, errors, omissions creep in. The Masoretes, the ones who wrote the Masoretic Bibles, wanted to standardize the text. They put in the vowels, they put in punctuation marks, and they did a pretty good job of making a standard text. The Masoretic text became the official Hebrew text of the Bible, the basis for all subsequent Jewish translations. But there are translations of the Bible that predate the Masoretic manuscripts, that is, that date from before the year 1000. The oldest translation is the Greek translation called the Septuagint. It was originally made for Greek-speaking Jews, but it was adopted by Christians. Christianity was born into the Greco-Roman world. And the Septuagint is the official Bible of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Another important early translation is the Latin translation, the Vulgate, which was adopted by the Roman Catholic Church. There's also a Syriac translation. And in the Jewish world, an early and often used translation was the Targum, which is the Aramaic translation. Jews consider the Masoretic text to be their official Bible. The Septuagint and the Vulgate have no standing in the Jewish community. As for the Targum, while it's considered a Jewish translation and Jews have traditionally looked towards it, it's not a literal translation, and it never replaced the Hebrew text. It's more like an explanation or commentary rather than an official biblical text. And this is really interesting because in Christianity, the Bible was more based on the Greek or the Latin translation. Now, there are differences between the Masoretic text, the Hebrew text, and the Greek and the Latin and a few other texts too. Academic scholars and translators compare these and they note the differences. And then there's the question of how do you want to handle these differences? So let me give you two examples where the Masoretic text omits words, but the other ancient translations supply them. And I have to say here that the ancient translations that supply them are probably correct. In other words, something fell out of the Masoretic text. But here's the way the new JPS translates, and then I'll compare that with the new Revised Standard updated edition. So the first example comes from Genesis chapter 4, verse 8. This is from the Cain and Abel story. New JPS. Cain said to his brother Abel, ... and when they were in the field, Cain set upon his brother and killed him. Now, in the new JPS translation, there is a note these translations sometimes have little footnotes. The note in the JPS says, ancient versions, including Targum, read, "Come, let us go out into the field." In other words, the ancient versions supply a phrase that is missing in the Masoretic text. If you look in the New Revised Standard, update edition, also in the New Revised Standard version, this is what they say. Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let us go out to the field." And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. They also have a note saying that the Samaritan, the Greek, the Syriac, the Vulgate have this, and the Masoretic text lacks, "Let us go out to the field." So again, both sets of translators are acknowledging that there's something going on with this verse, but one opts to keep the Masoretic text as it is, and the other opts to insert from the other versions what is missing in the Masoretic text. The same holds true for a verse in Psalm 145. 145, for those of you who are Jewish and attend synagogue service, this is the Ashrei prayer. It's an alphabetic acrostic, but the Masoretic text lacks the verse beginning with the letter Nun. It's just it's just missing. Actually, we know what that Nun verse was, because it's present in the translation in the Septuagint and in the Syriac versions, and in one Hebrew manuscript. And what's really interesting, in modern times, with the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's a what's called the Large Qumran Psalm Scroll, and lo and behold, in the Hebrew text from the Dead Sea Scrolls, this verse is there. The verse is, Ne'aman Elohim bidvarav v'chasid b'chol ma'asav. God is faithful in his words and gracious in all his deeds. So not only do we have this in the early translations, but we actually discovered it in modern times in Hebrew in a text from the Dead Sea Scrolls. But it's not in the Masoretic text. It's not found in the King James Version, but it's found in the New Revised Standard Version and some other modern versions as well, as the second half of verse 13, with a note that it appears in the Greek and Syriac and the Qumran scroll, but not in the Masoretic text. It does not appear in the new JPS, nor, must I say, does the Jewish Study Bible comment on it, although it might have. Maybe in the next edition, we should make a comment there too. So this is not to say that modern Jewish translations never adopt Septuagint readings if they differ from the Masoretic text, or that Christian translations always do. However, in general, Jewish translations are less likely to depart from the Masoretic text. Okay, fourth point. Jewish commentaries are more likely to call upon traditional Jewish interpretation from the Talmud and from medieval commentators. A quick computer search shows that Abraham ibn Ezra, one of the famous medieval Jewish commentators, is cited in the Jewish Study Bible 188 times. Rashi, who's even more famous, Rashi's name occurs 380 times. Maimonides, 113 times. Radak, David Kimchi, 153 times. Sometimes the commentators do not agree, and then more than one opinion is cited. Even fanciful midrashic explanations that arose from a verse may be mentioned in the Jewish Study Bible. At other times, medieval commentaries agree with modern interpreters and are cited to strengthen the argument. For example, Ibn Ezra, the medieval Jewish commentator, recognized that Isaiah chapters 40 and following were set in the Babylonian exile of the 6th century BC, and not earlier in the time of the Isaiah who wrote the first part of the book. So this is known and accepted by all modern scholars, but to find a medieval person who says that is really exciting. So, we like to give him credit too. The point of citing these traditional Jewish commentators is to draw, first of all, on the richness of the traditional exegesis, and also subtly to suggest that the Jewish Study Bible sees itself as at home in the chain of traditional interpretation, even though its main emphasis is on modern academic interpretations. This does not mean that non-Jewish commentaries ignore traditional Jewish interpretation. In fact, as pre-modern history of interpretation has become more important in the academic study of the Bible, we find it as well in works like the New Oxford Annotated Bible. It's a matter of degree and of space. Let me give you an example here from Ezekiel chapter 1, which is the prophet's vision of God's throne. It's a kind of psychedelic vision. Verse 4 reads, I looked, and lo, a stormy wind came sweeping out of the north, a huge cloud and flashing fire, surrounded by a radiance. And in the center of it, in the center of the fire, a gleam as of amber. This last term, a gleam as of amber, or gleaming amber, is what the New Revised Standard Version has. The Hebrew word for that is chashmal. We actually don't know exactly what it means. The New Oxford Annotated Bible comments that chashmal is perhaps molten metal, is language about pure, preternatural substance that has intrigued interpreters for centuries. And then it says traditions in the Talmud play with translations such as living fire and silent speaking. In other words, the New Oxford Annotated Bible is also citing the Talmud. The comment in the Jewish Study Bible is slightly longer. It also notes the uncertainty of the meaning of chashmal, suggests a derivation from Akkadian or Egyptian for the polished bronze, cites the Talmud tradition more specifically, and then it adds this note. The modern Hebrew chashmal, electricity, derives from this passage. Now, I have to be fair here. The annotators in the Jewish Study Bible were allotted a larger word count than the annotators in the New Oxford Annotated Bible, because the Jewish Study Bible does not include the New Testament. So the annotations on each book of the Bible, of the Hebrew Bible, could be longer. But what I want to note here is both the Jewish Study Bible and the New Oxford Annotated Bible cite the Talmud. But then the Jewish Study Bible goes on to mention a connection with modern Hebrew, which is more likely of interest to modern Jews than to modern Christians. Okay, point 5. The Jewish Study Bible often points out passages that have influenced Jewish practice or that are meaningful in Jewish life or literature or liturgy or are of Jewish historical interest. And here I'll give you several different kinds of examples. The first one is of historical interest. In Genesis 10, verse 3, the name Ashkenaz appears in a list of descendants of Noah's sons. So the Jewish Study Bible comments, Ashkenaz refers to the Scythians. Okay, that's really what it means in its context. And then it goes on to say, in the Middle Ages, Jews reused the term to refer to Germany and later to the Jewish communities of Central and Northeastern Europe. In other words, this is where the term Ashkenazic Jews come from. It comes from a word that has nothing to do with Germany, but was repurposed to mean Jews from Germany and Central Europe. About Jewish practice, the example is from Exodus 23:19. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. That may sound familiar to you. That's another verse that is extremely puzzling. We don't actually know where it came from or what it means. But in Jewish tradition, in rabbinic literature, this was the proof text for the rule that no meat products from domestic cattle can be cooked or eaten with milk or dairy products. It's the separation of meat and milk in the Jewish dietary restrictions. And then fowl or chicken also was included in meat products. And the Jewish Study Bible explains this as the origin of something. Not only, I have to say here, not only do we not know what "do not boil your kid in its mother's milk" actually meant originally, we don't know where the separation from milk and meat came from. It's not mentioned at all in the Bible, but suddenly it appears in rabbinic literature. Okay, let me give you another example from the book of Lamentations, Echa, chapter 3. It describes the suffering of going into exile. And verse 16 reads, "He has broken my teeth on gravel, has ground me into the dust." This verse is metaphoric. You shouldn't take it literally. But the Jewish Study Bible comments, the Midrash explains this literally, saying that on their way into exile, Israelites kneaded dough on the ground, picking up grit with the dough. The custom of dipping hard-boiled eggs or bread into ashes at the meal preceding the fast of the 9th of Av, commemorating the temple's destruction, derives from this Midrash. So you see how the Jewish Study Bible has filled in a midrashic explanation which led to a traditional practice, all deriving from a verse in Lamentations, which shouldn't be taken literally. It's metaphoric, but which the Midrash takes literally. Let me give an example from Jewish liturgy. Many biblical verses have found their way into Jewish prayers, especially Psalms, and the Jewish Study Bible often points these out. For instance, it mentions that Psalm 126 is recited before the grace after meals on Sabbaths and festivals. It also notes that Psalms 113 to 118 constitute the Hallel prayer recited on festivals. And it gives details about when and which sections are recited on specific festival days. A very important Jewish prayer is the Shema from the book of Deuteronomy. This is the one that begins, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone." And the Jewish Study Bible, as you would expect, has a long note on this. There's another interesting part of ritual or liturgy that comes at the end of certain books when they're read publicly. And this is true for Lamentations, chapter 5, verse 22. It ends on a note of despair. It says, "For truly you have rejected us, bitterly raged against us." That's talking about God. The new JPS translation repeats the previous verse. "Take us back, O Lord, and let us come back, renew our days as of old." And the annotation in the Jewish Study Bible explains, in public readings of Lamentations, in order not to conclude on a dire note, it is the Jewish custom to repeat the last positive phrase. So this is there because it is explaining a particular liturgical ritual of repeating a last person. It's actually printed in smaller type in the translation itself, whereas it is not that way in the New Revised Standard Version. Now let me go to theology. Genesis 12, verse 6 is an account of Abraham's travels, and we find the following phrase: the Canaanites were then in the land. Now, an alert reader may perk up their ears, because when you say the Canaanites were then in the land, it sounds like they were no longer in the land at the time this was written. The comment in the Jewish Study Bible says, and I'm going to read a lot of this here, this statement poses an obstacle to the doctrine of Mosaic authorship, since the Canaanites were still firmly in control of the land when Moses died. In other words, if Moses wrote the Bible, he wouldn't have said the Canaanites were then in the land. They were still in the land. Ibn Ezra suggests that the Canaanites may have taken the land from some prior occupants. And if not, this verse has a great secret. Ibn Ezra is being cagey here. The great secret, according to Joseph Bonfield, who was a commentator on Ibn Ezra, was that Joshua or another of the prophets wrote it. And since we are to have trust in the words of tradition and the prophets, Bonfield concludes, what should I care whether it was Moses or another prophet who wrote it, since the words of all of them are true and inspired? So you see how the medievals are trying to get over a theological problem, and this is represented in the Jewish Study Bible as part of the Jewish tradition in dealing with this phrase. So since I mentioned theology, let me also mention how Jews do not read the Bible. They do not read it in light of the New Testament or Christian theology, or as prefiguring Jesus. The New Oxford Annotated Bible, at Genesis 12, verse 3, which says, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed, notes the importance of this verse in Christian tradition, as interpreted in Galatians 3, verse 8. The Jewish Study Bible has no comment on this verse because it's not an important verse in Jewish theology or tradition. Passages that are important in Christian thought may be unimportant in Jewish thought, and vice versa. And while non-Jewish commentators are nowadays more apt to cite traditional Jewish sources, Jewish commentators, I think, are less often likely to cite traditional Christian sources like the Church Fathers. Let me give you a kind of famous example of this, Isaiah 7:14. The new JPS. Assuredly, my sovereign will give you a sign nonetheless. Look, the young woman is with child and about to give birth to a son. Let her name him Emmanuel. The Hebrew word which is translated as young woman, is alma. It does not mean virgin. The Hebrew word for virgin is betula. However, the Septuagint, the Greek translation, translated this word as parthenos, which in Greek means virgin. And this verse is cited in the Greek translation in Matthew chapter 1, verse 23, as proof text for the virgin birth of Jesus. This is a very important verse in Christian theology. The King James Version reads, therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son and shall call his name Emmanuel. Now, modern scholars of all faiths know that the word virgin is not in the Hebrew text, and many, like the new RSV, the New Revised Standard Version, translate young woman And some of them put a note in saying what the Greek has, and some don't. Nevertheless, this verse resonates so loudly in Christian thought that the person who wrote the annotations in the Jewish Study Bible saw fit to say the following: this passage, which plays a significant role in Christianity, is of no importance in Jewish tradition. In other words, the Jewish Study Bible interprets mainly in an academic context and in a Jewish context, occasionally mentioning how a Jewish reading differs from a Christian reading. Let me also add that all of the study Bibles have essays in addition to the books of the Bible and their annotations. And the essays cover topics relating to the study of the Bible, like textual criticism, canonization, the languages of the Bible, ancient Near Eastern history, and something about the history of biblical interpretation. The Jewish Study Bible includes 10 essays on Jewish interpretation of the Bible from ancient to modern times, and 7 essays on the Bible in Jewish life, including essays on Jewish Bible translations, the Bible in Jewish liturgy, the Bible in Israeli life, and the Jewish Bible in America. So let me conclude now with some general comments. There are many ways to read the Bible. There is not just one Jewish way, and there is not just one Christian way, and there's not just one academic way. Interpretation, and I would add translation, is a moving target. It keeps changing, changes over time as new knowledge comes to light and as new questions are posed. We're looking, for instance, feminist concerns, ecological concerns, and things like that. Many authors contributed to the annotations in the Jewish Study Bible, and they were given free rein regarding the balance between academic and specifically Jewish-centered annotations. But taken as a whole, the Jewish Study Bible presents a picture of how Jews over the centuries have read the Bible and how they read it today. And it also gives some indication of the role that the Bible has played and continues to play in Jewish thought and practice. And let me emphasize that the Jewish Study Bible is not intended only for Jews. It is meant for anyone who wants to learn about how Jews read the Bible. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to add, I have 2 comments and 2 questions to start us off. Those of you who are on Zoom can put your questions into the chat, and I will pose the ones that aren't repetitive with mine or with others to Dr. Berlin. And also I welcome everyone here in the live audience to pose questions. So while you're assembling your thoughts, everyone on Zoom, everyone here, I will make 2 comments and ask 2 questions because I have the privilege of doing that. And then I'll turn it over to the audience. So first of all, I wanted to just comment, Adele, on the Ashrei prayer, Psalm 145 with the missing nun. My daughter's name is Nava, and when she went to Jewish day school, they had this daily prayer exercise where when they said the prayer, every child whose name started with one of the letters in the acrostic would stand up for that verse, but she never got to stand up verse with the nun. So it was kind of traumatic for her. So I just wanted to put that into sort of real-time perspective in a Jewish day school in Silver Spring, Maryland. The second comment I have is that I used the Jewish Study Bible for the first time actually last year when I was teaching my Intro to Jewish Literature course. I have a few of my students from that class are here, I believe, or maybe one of my students from that class. And I will be teaching it again next semester, so I encourage people to sign up. I think you can speak to how the class went if you want. But what blew me away was that I'm a Jewish academic. but I'm really a very traditional Bible reader. I'm not a Bible scholar by any means. And the Jewish Study Bible really allowed me to access academic readings of the Jewish Bible in a way that I found palatable, right? Because of my Jewish outlook. So it was kind of mind-blowing for me as a Jewish student of the Bible who'd never encountered academic biblical studies. So I just wanted to thank you for enabling that. And now my two questions. The first is, why are Jews unlikely to depart from the Masoretic text? I feel like you made that statement, but I wasn't sure what about that particular translation, or not translation, but that particular text was compelling. And then my second question is, before the Jewish Study Bible, you were teaching Bible, right? For a very long time. And I was wondering how it was for you as a teacher to teach the Bible from a Jewish perspective without the Jewish Study Bible. So those are my questions for you.
Okay, the Masoretic text, well, basically, it was really the only Hebrew text through the ages. And it was through the medieval and modern period that was, a complete text, vocalized. And in Jewish tradition, no translation ever replaced the original Hebrew. It's interesting to compare with Islam, where the Quran also, translations of the Quran are quite recent. Of course, there are many Muslims who don't speak Arabic, who are non-Arabs. In fact, most Muslims in the world are non-Arabs. I think the biggest Muslim population is in Indonesia. But in Christianity, translations from an early time replaced the Hebrew because they were in a Greek and then Latin-speaking world. So, and that was just the way they accessed the Bible. So the Hebrew text, which happened to be the Masoretic text, because the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are different from the Masoretic text in a number of ways, first of all, are not complete, and second of all, were unknown until the years following 1948. So the Masoretic text was the Hebrew text of the Bible. Now, just to confuse you, because this is like endless spirals of things, there are little differences in different Masoretic manuscripts, but I don't want to go there. Basically, we can talk about one Masoretic text, and that is the official Jewish Bible. Yes, repeat your second question, please. What did I do before the Jewish Study Bible? Well, what your earlier comment is on target. What I was emphasizing here was the Jewish nature of the Jewish Study Bible, but actually it's more academic. I mean, most of it is academic based. And when I would teach Bible, I would also teach academic Bible, not Jewish Bible per se. And there are lots of, intros to Bible and comments on commentaries on different books. So the Jewish Study Bible and all these study Bibles are convenient because it's all packaged together. But, earlier on, I had to put together my own material from different places, but it was primarily an academic enterprise, which means what did the original words mean? What did it mean for in the time that it came from, in its own historical context, rather than what did it come to mean to the rabbis or to Rashi or to modern or the Midrash writers or things like that.
Thank you. Are there any questions from our live audience before we turn to our Zoom audience? Yeah, Dylan.
So I am interested after Simchat Torah, not only to be more intentional with Parsha study, but also with Haftorah study or Haftarah study, do you have any recommendations for sources other than the Jewish Study Bible, of course, to help with that?
So let's
Yes.
define our terms. Let's define our terms.
Sorry.
So a Parsha study is my women in Jewish literature class should know what this means because we just talked about it on Thursday or on Tuesday. Today is Wednesday, but I won't put you on the spot and I'll say Parsha is the weekly Torah portion that's read in the synagogue, and Haftorah is the weekly portion of the prophets that's read to accompany the Torah portion that's read in the synagogue. It's sometimes connected contextually or thematically, sometimes it's not. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, the Jewish Publication Society published the Torah in 5 volumes. That is the books of the Torah in separate volumes with extensive comments, and they published another volume of Haftarot that's written by Michael Fishbane. He was the one who wrote the commentary there. So for the Haftarot, you can look in that, and if you are interested in the Torah readings, you can look in the other 5 volumes. That's kind of a lot. I mean, that's a lot of reading, but I recommend them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions out here? All right, let me look in the Q&A. Oh. Okay. Well, it looks like chat is disabled, but sorry, I didn't mean chat. I meant Q&A. Okay, so here's Q&A. So Leon Raven asks, when we use the terms Jewish and Christian Bible, it sounds like they refer to different sources. Shouldn't we use the terms the Jewish and or Christian interpretation of the Bible?
Yes and no, because as I tried to show with the handout, the Bible is in a different format in Jewish tradition and Christian tradition. And the order of the books of the Old Testament, and again, the Christian Bible contains the New Testament. So when you say Bible to a Christian, it's Old Testament plus New Testament. When you say Bible to a Jew, it's just the Hebrew Bible, what the Christians call the Old Testament. So it's not just a matter of interpretation, it's what's considered to be Holy Scripture.
Thank you. And there's a question from Laura, my student from my Holocaust class, who says, how is it decided which part would be literal and which part would be metaphorical? Like, why is the teeth breaking on gravel part considered metaphorical, but the not boiling an infant in its mother's milk is considered literal?
Well, it hasn't been decided, and maybe I should defer to literary scholars like Sheila Jellin, and you're going to hear later in this series from 2 excellent literary scholars as well. It's a matter of the way you interpret it. And it's actually a deep question, because it's not always clear whether we should take something literally or metaphorically. Sometimes in poetry, we sort of assume that, it's metaphorical because we expect that in certain kinds of poetry. And the boiling the kid in the mother's milk is not in a poetic context at all. And I'm not sure what it would mean metaphorically in its context any more than literally. But it's really in the eyes of the interpreter. And there are differences in the way, whether interpreters have taken certain passages literally or metaphorically.
Okay. So thank you, Laura, for that excellent question. And you should join our Women in Jewish Literature class, because we're spending a lot of time talking about biblical metaphors. Yeah. Mark Clark asks, I'm confused.
That's not good. I did a bad job then.
No, Mark is a good guy. He's a good friend of mine, and I think he means it in a productive way, not in a critical way. is the Torah, the scroll we read from, a Masoretic text? And he asked, what is your response to Robert Alter's translation? Robert Alter is our third speaker in the series. So that's his question. Is the Torah we read?
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Those are two separate questions, obviously. No, the Torah is not the Masoretic. I mean, yes and no. Let me answer yes and no. The Torah that we read from the scroll has no vowels and no what I'll call trup or punctuation marks. In the Masoretic manuscripts, which are in book form, not in scrolls, they put in the vowels, they put in the trup or punctuation marks, and they have extensive notes on to control the text. The Masoretes, this is amazing to me because, of course, there were no computers, but they count the letters and they count the midpoint, and they tell you over here it's spelled with a yud, but over there it's spelled without a yud. And they're trying to make sure that the text is accurate, and they note all these little peculiarities and how many letters and where the midpoint and things like that. So the Torah is, how shall I put it, the Masoretic text without the vowels and the notes and the punctuation mark. It's the same basic text, but the Masoretes wanted to preserve how it was to be pronounced, how it was to be recited, where to put together the words, where to pause between phrases, etc. The Torah is completely unpunctuated. You have to kind of memorize it to read it. But it's a good question. Robert Alter's translation is excellent. I don't know what he's going to speak about. I think I do know, but yes, he's been speaking a lot about his translation. It's a lifetime project, and it is a very worthy translation.
Okay, so here we have two last questions, and then we have to end so that we can let people free to study for their exams and all of that. Parks, who is writing to us from Michigan. Hello, Parks. Good to hear your voice, even in type. He says, oh, everyone should take Intro to Jewish Literature next semester. That's his first comment. Okay. Are there any scholarly Jewish translations of the Apocrypha, despite their status as non-canonical in Judaism? They are certainly still Jewish texts in a certain sense.
They are. They're actually, it's an old, I forgot who wrote it, Hebrew Apocrypha. In terms of translations, I'm not sure, but I think Oxford is working on a Jewish annotated Apocrypha. And interesting, let me add, a few years ago, Oxford published the Jewish annotated New Testament. That may blow your minds a bit, but it was to give some of the Jewish sources that influenced or that helped understand the New Testament, which of course grew out of Jewish traditions and Jewish community, and to address some of the parts that are anti-Jewish or appear anti-Jewish, and to let me see what else I have on this. Do I have anything else on this? Yeah, to highlight Jewish texts and practices of the early Christian centuries, to make the context broader for understanding the New Testament. So that was, I thought, a very innovative thing to do, because obviously most commentators on the New Testament are Christian and are approaching it from a Christian point of view.
Thank you. And our final question for the evening is, do Jews tend to embrace the text of the Dead Sea Scrolls?
As academic texts, I mean, yes, it sheds a lot of light on the Bible, but the Dead Sea Scrolls are not going to replace the Masoretic texts And first of all, they're not complete and they are different. Sometimes actually they're closer to the Greek translation than to the Hebrew Masoretic text. So I think Jews, I wouldn't say embrace them, but Jews, like Christians, like everybody, is interested in them because suddenly we get a window into the Bible in Hebrew much earlier than the Masoretic text, much earlier than we had before the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. So it's like very important in the field of biblical studies and anybody who's interested in the history of the Bible.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for amazing lecture. Before you go, before anyone goes from Zoom or in person, I just wanted to make a couple of announcements about upcoming events and also about the food that's out there that I made them keep out there for people who want to eat afterwards. So I am doing a workshop on October 10th at 4 p.m. at the Young Library in the Alumni Room on how to interpret it's a workshop on Jewish interpretations of the Hebrew Bible. So if anyone would like to join us, I will be teaching that. And I also wanted to make sure that on your way out, you grab this flyer that gives details about the last 2 lectures in the series. We have on October 25th from 4 to 5 p.m. in the same place. We have Alana Pardes from Hebrew University who will be speaking on the book of Ruth and the question of migration. She just wrote a beautiful book about it's basically a biography of Ruth, and it takes you through all these different layers of interpretation from the ancient time to the modern time. And then our final speaker on November 15th will be Robert Alter, who was my advisor at UC Berkeley. And we just talked about him a moment ago. He translated the entire Bible over the course of his lifetime. That's from 7 to 8 p.m. here in the same room. So again, if you want to do a workshop on Jewish interpretations of the Bible, that's on October 10th at 4 p.m. And then these other events are in October and November. Please grab a flyer on your way out, and also please eat some food on your way out. Thank you so much for coming.
I don't think it's fine.